Welcome to The Healthy Writer, where creativity meets wellness. My name's Tess, and today we'll be talking about maladaptive daydreaming. In this video, you'll learn what maladaptive daydreaming is, how to tell if you may be a maladaptive daydreamer, and if you are, how you can interrupt daydream loops. So what is maladaptive daydreaming? Maladaptive daydreaming is a psychiatric response identified by Professor Ellie Sommer in 2002 while treating adults who had experienced childhood trauma, a survival technique and coping mechanism that's essentially extreme escapism. Maladaptive daydreaming creates a space where people can escape into their minds, while sometimes simultaneously becoming trapped by the coping mechanism, which has become, at that point, maladaptive, meaning not providing adequate or appropriate adjustment to the environment or situation. Imagine imagining for up to 3 hours or more in a day when you have a giant to-do list and it seems like no matter what you do, your brain won't allow you to do it. You keep getting lodged in daydream after daydream after daydream. It can quickly cycle into a nightmare loop where you just can't get out. How do you know if you're a maladaptive daydreamer? Do you daydream for many minutes or hours in a way that interrupts your everyday tasks and intrudes upon you actually living? Do you find daydreaming a compulsive habit that's automatic and addictive? Do you make facial expressions, pace, mutter, whisper, voice imaginary conversations out loud, cry or laugh reacting to what you've imagined? Do you create storybook worlds where you've devised all the characters and play them out in your head? Do you recycle characters from books, TV shows, or real people from your life to populate your fantasies? Are you kept awake at night by your daydreams? It's important to recognize that you don't have to experience all of these to be a maladaptive daydreamer. Often many maladaptive daydreamers have a variety of these, and it should be noted, especially as creative beings, that daydreaming on its own isn't a problem. It's only when daydreaming as a coping mechanism has become maladaptive, if it's interrupting your daily life, and if it's become uncontrollable or addictive. It should also be noted that Professor Sommer, who identified maladaptive daydreaming, also developed the Maladaptive Daydreaming Scale, which allows daydreamers to rate the severity of their symptoms, the intensity of their daydreams, their ability to control their daydreaming, the compulsivity of it as a behavior, the amount of distress the person experiences, and then the perceived benefits of daydreams, as well as how much daydreaming impacts the ability to carry out daily tasks. How to escape your escape mechanism if your daydreams are becoming a nightmare. Identify and reduce triggers. It's important to identify your triggers. When do you start maladaptive daydreaming? Is there a specific time period you usually do it? Do specific tasks like brushing your teeth, listening to music, or taking walks seem to initiate cycles of maladaptive daydreaming? Do you find the daydreams are more encompassing when you're isolated, scared, sad, tired, happy, hungry, energetic? Limit any triggers, and if you do have specific triggers that are unavoidable, use some of the techniques that I'll list in the future of this video to try and interrupt those flows. Obviously, there are tasks that are unavoidable for our own well-being, like brushing teeth and listening to music, which for many of us is a really enjoyable activity. The music, not necessarily the teeth brushing, but both are important in their own way. So it's not like some of these tasks you can necessarily stop or necessarily want to stop, but you can find ways to reduce the trigger from overtaking you. One of the first steps to interrupting the cycle of maladaptive daydreaming is to treat the trauma. Now, I want to note that this is a long-term solution and not a quick fix. I'll have other techniques that more quickly can interrupt the cycle, but treating the trauma can get to the underlying causes. So at the end of, your experience with maladaptive daydreaming, you're getting at the root causes that first encouraged your brain to develop the coping mechanism in the first place. There are many techniques to do this, like therapy, EMDR, yoga, meditation, trauma release exercises, laughter, dance, CBT, DBT, dietary changes, community, drug, alcohol, abstinence, positive affirmation, spiritualism, other somatic exercises. I'm hoping to get to many of these on this channel. One way that can be helpful to interrupt the maladaptive daydreaming cycle is to have an open and direct dialogue with yourself. Instead of talking to an imaginary person in your head, be direct with yourself. You can do this aloud, in your head, or on paper. Recently, as I started getting into a loop, I paused and asked aloud, do you want to live in your head or in the present? And then I laughed. I closed the drawer I had left open from some other tasks, stood up, and returned to writing an article about maladaptive daydreaming, which I'll link to below if you're interested. It covers all of this stuff, but if you're a reader instead of a listener, as I sometimes tend to be, it might be helpful. And then also you can refer to it for the future or this video. One thing to note is to be kind with yourself as you're, adjusting this coping mechanism. Be silly as you correct course. This shouldn't be, or this doesn't have to be a shameful thing. We all do things that do and don't work for us, and maladaptive daydreaming at one time really helped you. That's how all maladaptive behaviors start. At one point, it got you out of whatever terrible situation you were living, and it protected you by putting you in this kind of imaginative bubble. So it's okay. It's annoying, I know, but it's okay to deal with it, and I hope you'll be kind to yourself as you do. Another technique to get through or interrupt the cycle of maladaptive daydreaming is to switch gears into analytic action. If you can successfully do this, then you may be able to keep yourself grounded in the present and cut the daydream short. So, according to National Geographic, daydreaming requires the empathetic part of your brain, and engaging with that part of your brain actually disconnects you from the analytical part of your brain, which helps you make more reasoned decisions and focus on cognitive tasks like getting work done. When executive functioning turns on, your empathetic part of the brain turns off, and vice versa, which kind of makes me think about the people who are less empathetic. They tend to be the analytical ones, which totally makes sense in the context of how the brain works. So, if you can interrupt this empathetic part, it's not like you're gonna go totally cold and you won't care about people. You're not gonna be a psychopath. But if you can disengage from the probably over-empathetic part of your brain, even by convincing yourself to do 5 minutes of some task that you're procrastinating on, that might be enough to lodge you into that task for longer and interrupt that daydreaming cycle. Another way to interrupt the cycle is to count in a foreign language or recite a poem. Some tasks are so repetitive that they become the perfect daydreaming vehicles, like brushing your teeth. I don't know if counting in another language works because it interrupts the empathetic part of the brain, but when I deviate a daydream when I'm brushing my teeth into specific focused language, then I short-circuit the daydream. It might have to do with not being able to maintain two thoughts at once. So that might also be why the narration suggestion that I had earlier in this video might also work, because if you're focusing on one task, you can't focus on, you can only think one thing at once, even if it feels like you have a bunch of other things jumping in your brain. There's no such thing as multitasking. Multitasking is just switching back and forth rapidly between things. So, it's all about redirecting the focus. Narrate your actions. One of my techniques to disarming maladaptive daydreaming is when I start feeling like I'm drifting into a daydream, I start narrating aloud what I'm doing. First person narrative. If I'm putting things away and I begin experiencing, the daydream drift, then I might say, I'm picking up my coffee cup. I'm drinking my coffee. I usually don't have to do this for too many sentences before I start feeling grounded, and then I can, shift to the task I want to. I think it's also important to bring yourself back to the I. I am doing this thing. I am here. I am present. I am whatever you want to be. Positive affirmations can be really helpful. Time track. Okay, this is one of my favorite techniques because I find myself the most productive when I do it. I think part of it is that my brain can go a little ADHD-y. The executive functioning isn't always the highest, but this technique helps me get there. So this one may sound a little extreme, but works really well. So the way you do it is that you write down the time before you do every task, essentially. So I like to do it if I wake up at 6 a.m., I write, woke up at 6 a.m., showered at whatever time, blah, blah, blah. Then if I'm at my computer, say at 8:38, I'll write 8:38, and then I'll write down the task I want to be doing. In this case, making my first YouTube video. I don't know why that's so funny, but yeah. So I would write 8:38 making YouTube video, and then whenever I finish doing that, say it's 9:10, then I would write a dash to 9:10. So this works if I start feeling like I'm drifting, if I'm listening to music or I'm distracted by a text, I'll write down when that happens, and then I'll be like, oh, Tess, you should go back to the thing you really want to do as opposed to this distraction. And so, yeah, it helps you, I think. It helps also recognize where your time is going, which is really important for time management, and it also shows when you're more likely to drift off or what things are making you drift. So this one can be also really helpful for identifying those triggers. Another suggestion is to talk to your doctor. Jane Bigelson and Tina Kelly wrote an extensive piece for The Atlantic called When Daydreaming Replaces Real Life. It's very good. I suggest you check it out. I'll try to link it below if I remember. So within that piece, they detailed that one of the most effective medicinal treatments for maladaptive daydreaming is an OCD medication / antidepressant called fluvoxamine, I think is how you say it. I'm not a doctor, and my first suggestion typically is a medication because I think you can adjust things on your own. But if you're really stuck day after day and none of these techniques are helping, yes, talk to your doctor. You don't need to suffer. Maladaptive daydreaming may seem like an embarrassing thing to do, but at the end of the day, we all do crazy things. The human brains, function in a way to help us, but sometimes, what's a positive functionality can turn harmful. And in that case, you shouldn't have to feel like you're fighting your brain every day. There are ways to stay on track, to get better, to feel better. I highly recommend working through the trauma as best you can, trying these techniques, which work really well for me, and I hope they work well for you. Weird things happen when bad things happen. We live in a traumatized world. I believe it was Viktor Frankl who said, and I think my therapist quoted him one time during a session, it's normal to react abnormally to abnormal circumstances. And that's what daydreaming, maladaptive daydreaming essentially is, right? It's an abnormal kind of excessive response to maybe a life someone wasn't feeling very safe or happy in, or whatever it was. Just because you've developed this coping mechanism doesn't mean you have to keep it. I think that's the benefit of processing and reassessing where you are in life time and time again. You can choose what serves you, and you can leave behind what doesn't. Please like, subscribe, And please let me know what you think about this channel. Are you a maladaptive daydreamer? Have any of these suggestions helped you? And please send them to a friend or family member if you think they might be helpful. Thanks so much, all. Take care.